This is the disclaimer for Wildlife Control Consultant and Pest Geek Podcast for the Living the Wildlife podcast. Always follow national, state, provincial, and local laws when using pesticides and/or other control methods to manage pests. Wildlife Control Consultant, LLC, Pest Geek Podcast, Living the Wildlife Podcast, Stephen M. Van Tassel, or their or his affiliates are not responsible for followers' use of the information provided here.
Hi everyone, Stephen Van Tassel here, Wildlife Control Consultant, bringing you another episode of Living the Wildlife Podcast as part of the Pest Geek Podcast family. Hey, glad to have you on board. It's been a long week for me. I've been doing training across eastern Montana as part of my day job, so as far north as Plentywood and as far south as Forsyth. So we had 10 presentations in 5 days, covering the eastern section of Montana. It's the largest group. Part of training pesticide applicators, what we call private pesticide applicators, and so we give them their 6 hours of training that they need to renew their license all in one day. So I was part of that, and it was a very pleasant experience, so really enjoyed that. Talked about prairie dogs, some places, and then Richardson ground squirrels and others, and then commensal rodents and others. So they had a little choice of what they wanted me to speak on. So it was great to be part of the team, and really enjoyed it. And it was good to be back home and have that week finished. So, but enough about me, and we're going to talk about this particular week a little bit more institutional approach this week, talking a little bit more about where our industry is going. Some of you that may follow things on Facebook know that I'm running for Vice President of the National Wildlife Control Operators Association. I am a past board member, and I'm trying to put my hat back in the ring. This will be the first time, I believe, in our association's history, if memory serves, where there will be two individuals competing for one seat. Normally it's kind of a round robin thing, and there's no competition for a seat. People are basically run unopposed. Well, there is an opposition this year. I didn't know Chris Lund was going to be in that position, but he is the other candidate for the vice president election. So if you're a full member of NUCOA, do take some time to vote. So I believe that's coming out in November, those ballots, and then you have like 30 days to get it mailed in, and we'll see what happens in terms of the future of the association. So I wanted to talk today about some issues about associations, since I'm certainly running for office here. It gives a little bit of a vision where I am thinking about, where I'm coming to, but whether I'm being elected or not, I think these are issues that no matter what association or professional association that you're involved with, you should certainly be thinking about some of these things. And, sometimes in an association, or when we think about professional organizations, we always sometimes tend to think, and it's understandable, that we're always looking for the short-term win. How do I make money right now? How does this help me right now? And sometimes you have to step back and move away from a tactical decision and start thinking about strategic decisions. And so that can be hard. Sometimes the day-to-day grind with your business and everything, you're dealing from crisis to crisis to crisis to issue, and that you lose the opportunity to sit back and think about where am I taking my business? Well, the same thing can happen with associations, particularly when you have a lot of volunteer work, and sometimes it's just the day-to-day operations, and you're just trying to keep the ship afloat and keep it upright. But you have to be thinking about, where is the ship actually going? What is the goal here with the ship? And so sometimes it's just very easy to follow into a tradition. This is the way we've always done it. This is what we do. This is what's worked. And you just stay with that. So I hope that's kind of piqued your interest in terms of some thoughts that I'm going to have about this particular issue. So let's stop for a moment. Want you to take a few moments of your time, if you would, and like our podcast here with the Pest Geek Podcast. I hope you make sure you subscribe, hit the bell if you're looking at it on YouTube. I also am putting my podcast up on Rumble. There's certainly a lot less censorship on Rumble than there is on YouTube. So would like to have you also reach out and talk to me about different types of topics that you would like to have. What would you like me to speak on in terms of the wildlife control industry and techniques and tactics that I could certainly correspond to and do a little bit of research and try to do some of the legwork for you? How do you reach out to me? Well, you can reach out to me, of course, on Facebook, but you can also contact me at my personal email at wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. That's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. I do hope you take some time to reach out. Tell me what you like about the show, what you don't like about the show, what you'd like to see on the show. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe and like our channel. And join us on Facebook and the Pest Geek podcast family, the Pest Geek family. We have an active area on Facebook where people share ideas and triumphs and questions and that sort of thing. So we'd be glad to have you come on board there. So coming back to our topic today about professional and wildlife and pest control trade associations. What is the future of these organizations? And so let's talk a little bit about what these associations do. So typically, what you have with these associations is people join them for several reasons, one or more, it depends on the situation, but they typically tend to focus on things such as building community, and that can be a place where professionals just get together, where you can talk to people who are sharing some of the same concerns, anxieties, information, just interest, because I think it's Aristotle said friendship is when two people are staring at the same goal and walk together. And so certainly that would be the case with people in a professional association. Your same goal, you're both in the same industry, and it gives you a commonality that people in other parts of the public wouldn't have with you. And that's certainly an important role in terms of building community, and that's what associations can certainly do. And that's a very positive value, and I think associations do help that to the extent that people want to participate. Other people participate in an association because of some of the financial benefits that can accrue. For example, you may get access to lower cost liability insurance, for example, or sometimes you may get access to health insurance policies and group insurance in that regard. And sometimes you get discounts with certain manufacturers or suppliers of goods and services that you're interested that would help your business. That is also another valuable role of what an association, a professional organization, can do for you to enhance your business and well-being. I think there's a third area for where associations help, and that is simply training, and that's become a big issue. I know with NUCOA, NUCOA has spent an inordinate amount, or inordinate is probably the wrong word, I would say an incredible amount of money and time and energy into creating and distributing trainings that they have certified to try to improve the technical skills in the wildlife control industry. And they've done a number of not only training programs, but also training events and moving those around the country and making those available to people both in online environment and even in-person environment. And that is certainly a significant role, because when you have better skills, you are able to serve clients better, and you're able to raise the standards within the industry so that we're kind of lifting the boat a little bit by, a rising tide rises all ships, right? So by raising those standards, it also puts pressure on maybe non-members or members that don't have the same technical skill set, that they need to raise their game. And that certainly helps differentiate your company from the competition, because let's face it, it is getting more competitive out there. In some markets, it's quite competitive. And so by having that training, you are able to differentiate your company and your services from those companies that may lack that training and that skill set. And certainly associations do this, and some obviously better than others, but I do think that is an important role of associations. I think a fourth area, if I can list one, that associations are actively doing now, and that is just disseminating news. And that can be important. Now, the news can be just simply industry advances, but the news can also be related to issues of politics and regulation that may negatively or positively impact your business. News such as industry advances, such as new products, new services, new techniques, new companies coming on. You'll often maybe hear about different changes within corporations that they've been bought or sold or expanding their market, just sort of industry type news. And that can be an important thing because that way you can kind of see where are you fitting into the changing business landscape that is inherent within the pest control and wildlife control industries, because it is dynamic. Certainly it's not as dynamic, let's say, as the technological industry, which is changing dramatically, leaps and bounds, almost year to year. However, there are changes within our industry. We've even spotlighted some of those right on this podcast. For example, I'll just mention one like Skedaddle, which is a new franchise that's emerged in America, where their model is basically no kill. I mean, to simplify it, I think they do some euthanasia of animals, but their model is to do a minimal, if not zero, amount of killing. Now, that's a game changer within our industry because we've typically been trap, kill, remove, exclude. Now we have a new business coming into the market whose model is basically exclude, reunify, displace, rather than trap, kill, remove, exclude. Right, so they're sort of one-way door, exclude, prevent the animal from coming back and doing it in a live manner. That is a game changer, and that will have an impact on wildlife control behavior as they continue to expand in different markets, and as customers don't know what they want sometimes until they see it, until they know it's available. So I would anticipate that company would continue to grow. I could be wrong, but my suspicion is in terms of the culture of America in particular, where it's adopting an increasingly animal rights mindset, that this company will grow. Well, getting that kind of news is going to be important for you as a business, if you don't have Skedaddle in your market, but knowing that this could come and this could be a significant game changer. So the question would be, do you want to get ahead of that and start changing your business model, or preparing yourself to be sure that you have the skill set necessary so that you can offer that option of quote-unquote non-lethal control for your client? And for other clients, you can simply offer lethal control as well. Associations play an important role in getting that information out. But is there more? I mean, so I've covered the basic elements of what associations often do for us. And so let me go down that list again. They build community. They share news. They provide training. And they can also help with economic benefits such as discounts on insurance and goods and services that are important to you. Those are four very important roles of associations, and I think overall associations tend to do those things good enough or at least to the satisfaction of their members, where they're just not complaining enough to get anything more. But I want to ask the question today, is there something more that associations should be doing? Should we be thinking about what's the next step? Are we simply comfortable for where associations are right now, and that this is basically the new normal? Or should associations be looking deeper and further to expand their mission and services to their constituents? Well, if you haven't kind of gathered it so far, I'm of the opinion that we should be taking our associations to a different level, specifically the wildlife control industry to be in particular. I can't speak as confidently about the National Pest Management Association or the state associations. We don't even have a pest control association here in Montana, so I would love to be helping and starting one here in Montana. So if you're a Montana resident and you want to think about a pest control association here in Montana, I would definitely look me up, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com, and I would love to participate in getting that off the ground here in the state because it's desperately needed. But more broadly, in terms of the wildlife control industry, where should associations, be they state or be they national, what more can they be doing? And I want to put out a couple of ideas for you to think about till perhaps whether I win or lose this election, that perhaps we could bring some pressure to bear or some lobbying to bear to ask our leaders to be saying, we need to maybe recalibrate our emphasis. We've had a lot of energy being put into training, and that is good, and that has been beneficial. However, we now perhaps need to be thinking about other aspects of the industry that have been a little neglected, maybe because they're not as low-hanging fruit, but still important in that now we're at a place where we need to take these issues up. And I want to list a few of those and kind of do a little dive into that to kind of give you a sense of my heart and mind on this particular issue. So let's start with one that's near and dear. I've done a previous podcast on this, and this is government lobbying. I know government lobbying is hard. I understand lobbying governments is difficult. It's not popular. It can be controversial. It can piss people off, excuse my language, because when you take a stand, you're going to get enemies. I understand that. It's unfortunate in some ways. However, it's necessary in other ways. I would certainly hope that every person listening to this podcast would understand that just because you're angering the animal rights protest industry doesn't mean you've done a bad thing. And that part of politics is that making sure that your ideas and the vision that you have for the good, the beautiful, and the right gets enacted, or at least not oppressed by laws and regulations. The animal rights protest industry is not going to sleep, and they are actively lobbying. And this is something I have to remind some of my fur trapping friends, as well as those in the wildlife control industry. The animal rights industry has been pushing its ideology for decades. And it's only been really since probably the 1970s with the launch of, Peter Singer's Animal Liberation, where it really began to get some intellectual respectability. And they've been able to start getting legislation passed, whether through ballot initiatives, and just basically doing what we call the salami slice. And they just simply keep slicing into the pest control world in terms of wildlife control, banning equipment, banning techniques, and requiring more frequently regulations. Now, some of those regulations I don't disagree with. I think that the industry should have been more proactive and adopting some of those practices prior to being pushed. But unfortunately, we have, in a sense, the default is for people simply don't change, leave me alone, I just want to make money and move on with my life. And I think that's a mistake for our industry. We do need to be proactive. And so you may say, well, my association is involved in politics. Whenever a piece of legislation comes up or regulatory rule, we write a letter and lobby people and to try to beat it back. Well, that's all well and good. Unfortunately, that is really what is known as reactive lobbying. It's where you're only waiting for someone else to take the initiative and then you respond. I'm talking about the importance of proactive lobbying, where you are actively pushing for positive regulation. Now, I know some of you out there want to think that you folks are libertarians. Okay, I'm a libertarian. We don't need no stinking regulation. I was having an argument with one of the early founders of NUCOA in the past, and he was basically this kind of libertarian. We don't need any regulation, blah 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 blah. I would categorically disagree with that. There's always going to be regulation. I'm just sorry, that's just the way it is. Our population is too big. We can't just simply be out in the middle of the woods in our cabin and our neighbors are 50 miles away and we do whatever we want. Those days are gone, okay? And we need to understand that. But the other problem is when we're looking at this sort of libertarian model, we don't need any regulation, is that the answer to bad regulation is not no regulation. It's good regulation. Let me explain that. Let me give an illustration of that. We have a regulation here in Montana that says if you trap an animal, you are not allowed to remove that animal from the location where it's trapped. And this pertains to fur bearers. Now think about that for a moment. You say, well, yeah, they don't want you transporting the animal somewhere else and releasing it. I understand that, but listen to how that it's written. So if you're a wildlife control operator and you're doing some beaver work, and let's say near a heavily urbanized area, what that means is in order for you to remove that beaver from the location, you have to kill it at that spot. Now, what do you do if you have a bunch of people videoing you while you're doing that? You say, well, I would put it in the truck and take it away and kill it somewhere else. Well, I think that's a smart move. But you understand the way the regulations are written now, you would be violating the regulations. Now, I think it's a stupid regulation. I understand the regulation in terms of that. This is what happens with regulations. Sometimes they're written in a way because we didn't perceive how a future context, because life is changing. I would assume, I don't know for a fact, that regulation was probably written when Montana was a whole lot less populated than it is now. Right now I think we're at 1.2, maybe 1.3 million people in the state. Well, maybe that was written during a time where there was only 600,000. But nevertheless, the answer is not no regulation, because we don't want people moving animals around the state. There's disease issues, there's animal welfare issues involved in that. But by the same token, we don't want to have a wildlife control operator or a fur trapper being compelled to kill the animal in sight when this could become a YouTube moment that just angers a bunch of people. So again, the answer to bad regulation is not no regulation, it's better regulation. For example, when I was in Massachusetts, when I was doing wildlife control work, the regulation required that my eyeballs had to check each trap every day. Well, that's an inordinate amount of time, where today the regulation is that traps must be checked, but it doesn't say necessarily by who. So many people today are able to make far more money doing wildlife control. Why? Because they're able to let their client check the traps. I wasn't allowed to do that when I was in business. So you can see how better regulation can be a world of difference to the profitability of your particular company, but you have to aggressively lobby for that. The government isn't in the business of seeing how they can make your life easier, that you have to press them for it. And I do think in the wildlife control field, we have done a rather poor job in the area of actively pushing for positive regulation. And there's reasons for that, because I said it's hard, it's time consuming, and there is a second problem, or maybe I should say a third problem, and that is you have to have a shared vision. In order to work together for legislation or regulation, you have to have a common goal. And wildlife control operators at times, it's like herding cats. where their ideas are all over the place. And this is a problem within our industry that we need to start working through. And that brings me to my second issue, and that is we need to be doing the hard work of creating white papers, or what we would call position papers. You say, what do we need position papers for? Because that would give us an ideal of what we can push for, where we put our ideas on paper, and then we can tell politicians, we can tell regulators, these are our ideas. This is what we consider to be valuable. This is what we're pushing for. Let me give an illustration of what would be one of those position papers. We need to have a euthanasia animal dispatch position paper. That is important in my opinion. We need to put our marker down and say what are legitimate forms of animal killing. And then what are the contexts for those? You may say, oh, we don't want to open that can of worms. Look, I understand that this sort of white paper work is exceedingly difficult, tedious, mind-numbing, grinding work. But if we don't do it, we're going to then keep having to rely on the AVMA standards. And I've done a podcast on the AVMA standards. I've been begging the industry to stop kissing up to the AVMA standards. These are not your friends. Those standards are written in ways that are going to undercut your ability to make a living down the road, or you're going to have to totally transform the nature of your business. It's coming, folks. Whether you believe it or not, it's coming. We need to push back against some of these things, because what's happening is the AVMA standards are becoming the de facto definition of what euthanasia and humane dispatch are becoming, and that state wildlife agencies are adopting these things. Oh, is this AVMA standards? And nor should we be using some of those standards. It's fine if you can to the extent, but they're not practical for us. And I would argue in many ways they're completely unreasonable. But do we have a position statement on this? How about carcass disposal? How about the importance of communicating the options to our clients? And that brings me to now my third aspect of what I think associations should be doing. This is what the future is. What should associations be doing? I've mentioned the importance of government lobbying. I've mentioned the importance of creating position papers. The third area is a vibrant, active ethics board. Unfortunately, in terms of the wildlife control industry, I have yet to see one. Do we have an ethics statement in NUCOA? Absolutely we do. I think it's a pretty good one, to be quite frank about it. But it has no teeth. We need to be telling people and telling customers who use our members that they have the ability and the right to demand proper service, and that our members are fulfilling their ethical obligations under that code. But how does a customer explore these? Oh, Stephen, this is a sticky wicket. Yes, I completely agree. It is hard to do this. It's also an issue of many people don't like to judge because they're always afraid that the knife is going to come back to them. But that's something that we need to overcome. You know, when I was an EMT, that was always the fear. Am I going to make a mistake that's going to harm someone? When I was an emergency medical technician, am I going to make a mistake? And I had a colleague just look at me and she said, don't make the mistake. You say, well, that's a little simplistic, but you know, it worked for me because it just meant I need to follow my training. And if I do my training, I will be fine. And that's what we need to remember with wildlife control operators, is that we need to have an ability to look at the behavioral business practices of our members and say, does this meet the standards? But we have to have explicit standards in order to have something to judge our membership on. Again, all three of these areas may not be able to be done simultaneously. That may be too big of a lift for an association. There may be other issues that I haven't discussed here that maybe an association could work on as well. But these are three that I'm certainly putting out there for you to consider and ask yourself whether you're dealing with a state association, whether you're dealing with a national association or a regional association, doesn't matter. These are three areas that I think many associations do not adequately address. And I would hope that I can convince you to perhaps think, if nothing else, at least think about it and say, hey, maybe Stephen has a point. Maybe I don't agree with 2 or 3, but maybe number 1 we should be doing, or maybe number 3 we should be doing, or maybe something different entirely he hasn't mentioned. But how can we move our associations beyond camaraderie, training, news, and just getting discounted stuff? But is there something more that our associations could be doing? And I just want you to think about that. Well, thanks for listening today. Again, I'm Stephen Van Tassel, Wildlife Control Consultant. I do hope you take time to drop me a note. Let me know how I'm doing. Let me know what topics you'd like to have. And how do you reach me? It's wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. You can also reach out to me on Facebook and visit us again at Pest Geek Podcast Family on Facebook as well. We'd be glad to have you on board. Hope you've given something to think about. I'd love to hear from you because, again, this is Living the Wildlife Podcast. Why? Because we want you to live the wildlife, not be the wildlife. Take care, everyone.